Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second day of the Young Researchers in Spectral Geometry conference. I remind you that the conference is recorded. And today we will have 3 talks. And we start right away with a talk by Germain Gendron. And he will speak about uniqueness and stability for an inverse Steklov problem. The floor is yours, Germain.
Thank you, Alexandre. So I would like to begin by clarifying the title of my presentation. So what is an inverse problem? We can say that an inverse problem studies the cause of a phenomenon from the observations of its effects. In many cases, we have only indirect access to information. For example, this type of problem occurs in astrophysics when you want to understand the geometry of a black hole from its influence on the behavior of waves, or in medical imaging when you want to determine the electrical conductivity of an organ by measuring intensity and voltage on the skin. This last example is called electrical impedance tomography, and it is used to determine whether or not cells are cancerous. Indeed, cancerous cells conduct electricity better. An archetypal inverse problem is that of Calderon. So Alberto Calderon was an Argentine mathematician who began his professional career as an engineer for an oil company. And the methods used by this company were also based on electrical impedance tomography. So Calderon questioned the possibility of studying this in a theoretical way. And in a very famous article published in 1980, Calderon asked the following question: can the electrical conductivity of a body be determined by making current and voltage measurements on its boundary? So here is the mathematical formulation for this problem. We take for frame a smooth compact Riemannian manifold of dimension greater or equal than 2 with a smooth boundary. And we consider the Dirichlet problem minus delta U equals omega U in V and U equals psi on the boundary, where delta is the Laplace-Beltrami operator defined by this equality, and omega is assumed to lie outside the Dirichlet spectrum in order to have a uniqueness of the solution of this equation. The Dirichlet to Neumann operator, that I will also call DN-map, is defined by the normal derivative of the unique solution U of the Dirichlet problem that equals psi on the boundary. So this is the operator that usually models the current voltage data. And the mathematical formulation of the Calderon problem is the following. Does the knowledge of the DN-map, oh, sorry, there is a typo, it's lambda, at a fixed frequency determine uniquely the metric of the manifold? So we know that the answer to this question is no. Indeed, it is known that there are some natural invariances. So there is a first invariance by any diffeomorphism preserving the boundary. So if you take a diffeomorphism that is equal to the identity on the boundary, then the pullback metric of G by phi gives the same DN-map as the DN-map associated to the metric G. And when V is a surface, there is another invariance when omega equals 0. If you take any conformal factor that equals 1 on the boundary, then the conformal metric CG gives the same DN map as the DN map associated to G. So we could stop here since we have the answer to the problem posed by Calderon, which is no, there is no uniqueness. But we can also go on to ask whether the previous obstructions are the only ones. So here are some results. If V is a smooth two-dimensional Riemannian surface, and if the DN map is defined on any open subset of the boundary, then it determines the metric up to the natural gauge invariances 1 and 2, where one is this one and the second is this one. And when the dimension of V is greater than 3, and if V is real analytic, then the DN map determines uniquely the metric up to the first invariance. So my framework is the following. I consider V a manifold that has the topology of a cylinder equipped with a warped product metric G that equals f of x times dx squared plus dy squared, where f is the conformal factor, dx squared is the Euclidean metric on the interval 0, 1, and dy squared is the metric on the circle induced by the Euclidean metric. It is known that in this case, the data of the DN map determines uniquely the metric G of the manifold. In other words, if two DN maps are equals, then the conformal factors must be equal. Now, the question that will interest us is this one. Is it possible to recover the metric with a weaker hypothesis than the data of the DN map? And more precisely, our new hypothesis will be on the spectrum of this operator. So the DN map has a discrete spectrum that goes to infinity and called the Steklov spectrum. And the inverse Steklov problem can be formulated as follows. What type of geometrical informations on V can we get from the Steklov spectrum? So it is known, for example, that this spectrum determines the number and the length of the connected components of the boundary when V is a surface, or the dimension of the manifold and the volume of its boundary, or the integral of the mean curvature on the boundary when the dimension of V is greater than 3. So when V is a cylinder equipped with this metric, we ask the question, does the spectrum of the DN map determine the conformal factor? So we can say that the answer is no, because if you consider any smooth diffeomorphism from V to V, then the DN map associated to the pullback metric of G by psi is conjugated to the DN map associated to G, and so they have the same spectrum. And by choosing the diffeomorphism psi that reverses the direction of the path of the x coordinate, we get another metric whose DN map is the same as the one associated to G. And it has the same structure. So our goal is to study the inverse Steklov problem for this model despite this obstruction. So first, we will prove that we have uniqueness up to the previous obstruction. And the key point is separation of variables to reduce the initial Dirichlet problem to a one-dimensional problem that will allow us to use the Weitich-Marsh theory. And in a second time, we will get an interest about the question of stability. So the question is, if the Steklov eigenvalues are known up to a positive and small epsilon, is it possible to find an approximation of the conformal factor f? Here, the key point is that we will reduce our problem to a moment problem. So the goal of my presentation is to present you those two results. So here is the first result that I propose to prove. The data of the Steklov spectrum determines uniquely the metric G of the manifold up to the previous invariance. So in other words, if two Steklov spectra are equal, then the associated conformal factors must be equal up to the involution 1 minus x. So now I will present the ideas of the proof in a very general way first, and then giving some details. So first, we find the Hilbert basis of L2, in which L2 of the boundary, in which the DN map can be written as a block diagonal matrix where each block has dimension 2. And thanks to this diagonalization, it becomes possible to compute with precision the two eigenvalues of each block. And then we get two sequences, lambda minus and lambda plus, whose union is the whole spectrum. We can express each eigenvalue of each block with using the Weitich-Marsh functions. So I will define what are those functions later. But here it is just important to notice that those functions are meromorphic functions. The function m characterizes f of x, and n characterizes f of 1 minus x. And so the idea is to prove that the equality of our spectra implies one or of those two equalities, m equals m tilde or m equals n tilde. In the first case, we will have that f of x equals f tilde of x. And in the second case, f of x equals f tilde of 1 minus x. And so the result will be proved. So now I give details about this proof. So the first step consists in reducing the Dirichlet problem to a countable system of differential equations. So we start by using a separation of variables. And we write the solution of the Dirichlet problem as the sum of umx exponential of IMY, where this family is a Hilbert basis and of eigenfunctions of the Laplacian. And as we can do the same for T. So as Psi is a function of the boundary, and the boundary has two components, we can write C as the data of two functions, each of one of the component. And we apply separation of variables on each component, C0 and C1. So this separation of variables leads to rephrase the Dirichlet problem as a countable system of Sturm-Liouville equations. And we see that in each equation, the potential Q is the same and characterizes the conformal factor because it is omega times f of x minus. Here we can do a remark. When omega equals 0, then the metric do not appear in those equations. So it is an explicit way to understand one of the natural invariants we mentioned before. Okay. So when you have a Sturm-Liouville equation, minus u double prime plus q times u equals minus z times u, you can build three entire functions, d of z, e of z, and delta of z, defined as Wronskians of functions that are fundamental system of solutions satisfying those conditions. So even though I precise what are C0, C1, S0, and S1, it is not important to have that in mind, but I have to introduce it to build my functions. All we have to know is that the Weil-Titchmarsh functions m and n are defined as quotients of those entire functions. So m equals d over delta and n equals e over delta. And those functions are very important for our proof because thanks to the Bohr-Marchenko theorem, we know that they characterize the potential of the Sturm-Liouville equation, which is precisely, in our case, the conformal factor of the metric. Okay. So now we can precise the diagonalization of the DN map. We said that in a good Hilbert basis, the DN map can be expressed, as a block diagonal matrix. And we can now give explicitly what are the blocks of dimension 2. So thanks to the knowledge of those blocks, we will be able to compute very precisely the eigenvalues of the spectrum using the function m, n, and delta. Okay, so looking at this block, we can guess what are the first term in first order development asymptotic of the eigenvalue. Indeed, we have this asymptotic for delta z. So we see that delta has an exponential growth, and consequently, the anti-diagonal terms are quite invisible. So we can read the first term of each eigenvalue as on the diagonal of the matrix. Precisely, when we compute it, we find those asymptotic. And we see that we have the presence of the constant f of 1 and f of 0 in each sequence. So those constants will be, in fact, the first invariants we get from the Steklov spectrum. In other words, if two Steklov spectra are equal, then the values taken by f on the boundary must be the same for the two conformal factors. So without loss of generality, I will assume that f of 0 equals f tilde of 0 and f of 1 equals f tilde of 1. So step 3, we want to prove that the equality of the two spectrums implies one of those two equalities, m equals m tilde or m equals n tilde. But at first sight, it is not obvious to prove that because we just have discrete equalities between m and n. Well, we can't have more than discrete equalities between m and m tilde or m and n tilde. So the question is how to extend one of those equalities to the whole complex plane. We distinguish two cases, and I will just develop the first one. So I assume first that f of 0 equals f of 1 equals 1. So we have, in fact, a very simple, you see here, it is known that an asymptotic of n is m, and same for m of m square. So when we replace those asymptotics in those two equalities, we find very simple, two similar, very simple asymptotics for our two eigenvalues. And so if m is large, each eigenvalues of index m square is close to the integer m. And as it is the same for the eigenvalues with tilde, we have equalities of the subset of eigenvalues with same index m square. And this can be written as equalities between traces and determinants of each induced operator lambda m. Now, we will write those two equalities using the Weil-Titchmarsh functions. The idea is now to extend those equalities, those discrete equalities, on the whole complex plane. And the key point is the Nevanlinna theorem. So here is the Nevanlinna theorem. You consider a function h, which is analytic on the right half plane, and that is of exponential type. If h cancels, well, quite often, in the meaning that the sum of reciprocal zeros goes to infinity, then h must be 0 everywhere. So now I will explain why our functions satisfy the assumption of the Nevanlinna theorem. Sorry. So first we have the following asymptotics for delta D and E. And we defined lowercase d, lowercase e, and lowercase delta as d of z square, e of z square, and delta of z square. They are also analytic functions, and they are of order 1. So if we replace in those two equalities the uppercase letters by the lowercase letters, then we get equalities on, here you can replace m squared by m. So this is true for all the integers. And so we are well, we can apply Neverliner theorem to extend those two equalities by replacing m squared by z squared, and so by z. So those two equalities are in fact true on C, on the whole complex plane. So from those two equalities, we deduce, and that requires to work a little, that delta equals delta tilde. Then we simplify in each line, and we find that both the sum and the product of m and n are equal to the ones of m tilde and n tilde. And this implies that m equals m tilde, or m equals n tilde. So we have the result. And when f of 0 is different from f of 1, we can show that we still obtain punctual equalities between the two sequences of eigenvalues that grow slower. Not on the set of all the integers, but on a subset that also satisfies the Mond's condition. And thanks to the Neverliner theorem, we prove with similar arguments the equality m equals m tilde, and so f of x equals f tilde of x. So this finishes the proof of my first result about uniqueness. A natural question that follows the one of the uniqueness is the question of stability. If the Steklov eigenvalues are known up to a positive, fixed, and small epsilon, is it possible to find an approximation of the conformal factor f? So I'm going to give some answers about stability. We want to weaken the assumption that two Steklov spectra are equal. And for this, we are going to define what is the closeness between two spectra up to epsilon. As an equality between two sets is defined with a double inclusion, we start by defining an analog of the inclusion. So let epsilon be a positive number. We say that the spectrum associated to the metric G is approximately included into the spectrum associated to the metric G tilde if every epsilon in the first spectrum is close to an eigenvalue. Sorry, if every eigenvalue in the first spectrum is close to an eigenvalue of the second spectrum with a distance less than epsilon. And the second point is an analog of multiplicity. So we denote the notion of approximated inclusion by this symbol that reminds an inclusion. So we say that two spectra are close up to epsilon if each one is approximately included in the other up to epsilon. And we also denote this by a symbol that remains inequality. In this section, we want to prove the continuous dependence of the conformal factor with respect to the Steklov spectrum. So is it possible to prove that if two spectra are close up to epsilon, then the two conformal factors are close? Of course, there is an immediate obstruction since there is no uniqueness in general. But we also know what are the functions for which there is uniqueness. The only way to get a strict uniqueness result is to assume that f is symmetric with respect to 1/2. And that will be our technical assumption in this part. Okay. So in order to enunciate the result, I introduce the class C of A of admissible functions that must satisfy three conditions. First being C2, second being symmetric with respect to 1/2, and third being majorized by an arbitrary fixed positive constant A, as well as its inverse and its first and second derivative. So here is the result. We keep the same manifolds and metrics, and we fix two positive numbers, epsilon and A. Sorry, I didn't fix A. So there is also a positive number A. So if we suppose that our conformal factors belong to the class of admissible functions, then if two Steklov spectra are close up to epsilon, the associated conformal factors are close for the L2 norm up to a logarithmic error. And here CA is a constant that only depends on A. So briefly, I will give the main steps of the proof. So the hypothesis of closeness between the two spectra implies the closeness between the determinants of each induced operator in the diagonalization, the block diagonalization we used before. So those estimates can be written using the Weil-Titchmarsh functions m, n, and delta. So we have this estimate, and the question is how to relate this to the difference of the conformal factors f minus f tilde. Sorry, okay. So recall that q minus q tilde is equal to minus omega f minus f tilde. So it's quite the same quantity. And using the definition of the Weil-Titchmarsh functions as Wronskians, we can get an integral equality between the determinant, the difference between q and q tilde, and the functions C0, C1, S0, and S1 that we had previously defined to introduce m, n, and delta. So details are not important here. After many pages of computation, we can build an invertible operator, B, such that this quantity is related to the integral between 0 and 1 of an hyperbolic sine times b, our operator b, evaluated into q minus q tilde. So the idea is to get an estimate on b of q minus q tilde, and then to invert b to get an estimate on q minus q tilde, and so on f minus f tilde. So from this estimate, by making enter this exponential under the integral sign with a little change of variables, we reduce the initial problem to a moment problem. So details are its computation. It's not very easy computation, so it's not very difficult to come from here to here. So so we reduced the initial problem to an inverse moment problem, Kevin. So we know that a continuous function is entirely determined by its moment when those are known on a subsequence of indexes that satisfy the Moon's condition. So it is natural to ask the question, do we have something similar when those moments are not precisely known, but just known up to epsilon? Can we get a good approximation of H when its moments are known up to epsilon? So the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and I will try to highlight the idea. So let us denote by MM the space spanned by the monomials with even degree from 0 to 2m, and Pm of H, the orthogonal projection of H on this space. So we can decompose the square of the L2 norm of H as the square of the L2 norm of its projection on M, plus the square of the distance between H and M. And we can observe that when epsilon is small, the projection of H is small. And when M is large, this projection becomes large, but the distance between H and M is small. So as this is true for every M, the idea is to choose an M of intermediate size, large enough to make the distance between H and M small, but not too large to let the projection of H small. So with such a M, we are able to prove an estimate of logarithm type. Now, from this estimate on H, we can come back to our initial problem. So H was this ugly function that we can decompose as H1 plus H2. And those functions have a disjoint support. So the square of the norm of H is the sum of the square of H1, the square of the norm of H1 and H2. And this leads to estimate the norm of H2. And returning to the tau coordinate, we can estimate the L2 norm of our operator evaluated in Q minus Q tilde. I recall that L is Q minus Q tilde. So we have an estimate of log type. So the last step consists in a very classical functional analysis. B has a very good structure. We can decompose it as the identity plus C, where C is a kernel operator defined by this equality. And we can prove by a classical induction argument that the norm of C is C iterated at the power n is less or equal than the general term of an exponential series. So this implies that B is invertible and its inverse is the alternate sum of C at the power n. And the invert of B is majorized by a constant that depends only on A, because H1, this function, is majorized by some constant CA. Okay, so so at last, we deduce an estimate on the difference of the potential Q minus Q tilde in norm L2, so of a log time, because this quantity is majorized by a constant and this quantity is majorized by this term. And so we get an estimation on the difference, an L2 estimate on the difference of the conformal factors. So the main references for me to work on those two results was two articles written by Thierry Daudet, Niki Kamran, and François Nicolo. One on the uniqueness and non-uniqueness in the Calderon problem, and the other one about the question of stability. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. So it is time to ask a question or to make comments. If anyone wants to go ahead with that, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
I would have a question myself. So the methods that you present seems to be able to say a lot of things, but the examples that you give are a product of interval with a sphere. What happens if you take something that is not a sphere, a cylinder with general ends?
Yeah, so when you take any manifold of dimension n, it is not, well, I did not succeed in put the eigenvalues by 2 by 2. You know, we have problems to identify from a set equality eigenvalues by eigenvalues. So I think the main problem is here, but you can increase the dimension of the, not take just a circle, but an hypersphere. And if you add the hypothesis, you have the same results. Technical hypothesis on the metric of the boundary. You have also uniqueness. And I tried also to change an hypersphere with a torus. And it works. It also works with a technical hypothesis just to identify with the same, to identify the eigenvalues of the spectra with the same, who has the same index to apply a Neron-Miller theorem, etc. So it is possible. It is possible.
What type of technical hypothesis are we talking about?
I assume that the derivative of the logarithm, the logarithmic derivative of f in 0 and 1 was less or equal than 1 over n minus 2, where n is the dimension of the manifold. So you see, when n equals 2, there is no condition because it's infinity, 1 over n minus 2.
Okay, I see.
Thank you, Germain. Thank you, Jean. Anyone else wants to have to ask a question? We have time for one more question, I think. No, perhaps. Okay, I have a question, but I think it's a hard question. So if you replace the interval by a disk or something else, then you don't have access to the Weil-Titmarsh formalism, right? If you took not replacing the circle by something else, but the interval by something that has bigger dimension, then probably it's too hard, right? It's a completely different.
Well, we quit the one-dimensional world now.
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult question, interesting but difficult question. So.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Germain. Let's thank Germain again.
Thank you.